Is this the dagger?
G'day guys, JB here. Week 3 of the 2024-25 NBA season in the books, and more injuries galore, more player movement, or as I said, injuries galore, players going on and off the bench, left, right and centre, and some interesting movers and shakers at the top of each conference. Some of these movers and shakers probably expected, but we're starting to see a lot of consistency out of some teams. We've seen some rebounding by some teams, which is really good to see. It's going to make it a lot more of an interesting competition and contest going forward, not being as predictable as many people would have liked, but it's good to see the league trying to pan out a little bit. Some real movers and shakers, as I said, not only from an injury standpoint, but certainly some performance standpoint as well. So let's get into it. Let's get into the Week 3 review, I should say, for the 2024-25 NBA season. We'll start with Atlanta, 1-2 record in Week 3, putting them at 11th after 3 weeks of the season. Got their win against New York, and one of their standout players, probably not the standout player, but certainly their standout offensive player of the week, Jalen Johnson, 21 points, 10 rebounds, 4.3 assists. Nice work there by the young forward. 0.3 steals, 1 block a game on 2 turnovers. But the ultimate talking point right now, certainly with Atlanta, well, there's 2 talking points really. Number 1 certainly is the play of Dyson Daniels. I mean, the guy right now is putting up a Defensive Player of the Year performance, and it's going to be really, really hard for him to try and win that, particularly when you look at the numbers that someone like a Wembanyama is producing, when you look at the numbers that Anthony Davis is able to produce, and the importance to the Lakers roster that he has when he's on the floor. But Daniels right now leading the league in steals, leading the league in deflections, set to absolutely shatter the NBA record for deflections in a season. Tracking right now on the season to close to 600, and the record's in that 300 range. So he's having a massive year, massive impact, and really getting it going there. And the big thing there that's also helping Atlanta, outside of Dyson Daniels playing some really good defensive play, is essentially the fact their ball movement is much better when Trae Young isn't there. Who'd have thought the really ball-demanding guard or ball-demanding forward was stifling the way his the offensive side of the ball produced. They look better without Trae on the floor. They're able to get that ball moving, and defensively they've looked elite there with Dyson Daniels. It'll be really interesting to see just how this continues to pan out for Atlanta, and whether any trade talks again start to rise with Trae Young and his performance there in Atlanta. Over to Boston, 2-1 record on the week, second in the Eastern Conference on the season. Got wins over Brooklyn and Milwaukee. Really pushed the pace, really forced errors there against the Bucks, and they are just going to run and gun where they can with Brooklyn, knowing on the other side of the ball it's going to be pretty easy for them to contain. Jason Tatum continues to have a standout season, 32 points, 8.3 rebounds, 4.7 assists on the week, 1 steal, 0.7 blocks, 4 turnovers, the high usage rate. Plenty of superlatives you can supply to Boston right now. They've got a lot going on from their bench. They've got a lot going on defensively. They've got plenty of movement on the offensive end. Ultimately, though, the big thing that's going to hang over here is the fact that you've got Jaylen Brown playing all-NBA level basketball once again. You've got Jason Tatum playing to an MVP level, and I'd have no issues suggesting that Jason Tatum would be the MVP of this league if it wasn't for a guy that we'll talk about in the Western Conference a little later in this video. That's the kind of game that he's having. Now, there's a fair bit that goes into Jason Tatum. People don't like him. Why, I really don't know. Yeah, okay, all of his childhood idols, he wants to replicate them. God forbid someone actually lives out a childhood dream. God bless the man. Really made a fair bit of noise following the 2022 finals. Didn't win finals MVP last year, but he certainly didn't stink the joint up. In fact, you could argue there were some games where the reason they won the game was because of his performance. Really stepped up where they really needed to. And he's having yet another big season. I'll go as far to say is Jason Tatum's having the best Celtics season since Larry Bird. That's how well he's playing. In fact, I'd say the run that he's been having probably for the last 3 years is as good as any Celtic since Larry Bird. The only issue is people don't like him. He's having big numbers, and they would stand out a little bit more if it wasn't for a guy in the East. But Boston right now cruising, Jason Tatum cruising. They're in for another big year. Over to the Nets, the 1-2 record on the week. Not ideal, but they still managed to sit in playoff contention, 5th in the East after 3 weeks. Got to win against New Orleans, and for all that speaks for, I'll let you make the decision. Cam Thomas just continuing to be an offensive piece there. 23.3 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 0.3 steals, 3.7 turnovers. And one of the key talking points for this Brooklyn side so far, particularly in this week, has been Ben Simmons. There's been a lot of chat around how is Ben Simmons going to play when you've got Cam Johnson, when you've got Dennis Schroeder, when you've got Cam Thomas, who are playing some really good basketball. He needs to find somewhere to fit in. If he's going to be on the offensive end, yep, you're going to see him be creative with his passing. You know that he can bring some length and determination to the defensive end if he really wants to. But it's actually got to a point now where they're starting to put him on the bench. They're saying, hey, Ben, we need you to come off the pine. We really need you to try and contribute. I don't know how conducive that's going to be for Brooklyn. I certainly don't know how conducive that's going to be for Simmons, considering the scout always has been that if it's not about Ben, it's not about anybody. Yeah, interesting times. I think if Ben Simmons is able to lock in, you're able to really push his value there, then maybe this Brooklyn team's a little bit better, and I think they can continuously play to a really high standard, particularly if Nick Claxton's going to lock in defensively as that big. But if you're going to end up into a drama-filled Ben Simmons season, and it's fearing like it's going to teeter on that right now, then a lot of this early work's going to be for nothing. So I think they're going to have to harness Simmons. They have to try and get him into a position where they can feel it's more about him, but still let the others flourish. That's a tough equation to balance. Over to Charlotte, 2-1 record on the week, and they managed to crack the top 8 there in the East. Wins against Detroit and Indiana. And LaMelo Ball, again, playing some really consistent basketball. 31.3 points, 5.7 rebounds, 7.3 assists, 1.7 steals, and 0.3 blocks on 3 turnovers. It really is just starting to become now a matter of man management, because we're seeing a lot out of this Charlotte team that's proving really promising. Again, LaMelo Ball contributing, Brandon Miller contributing. Don't like to say it because I don't really rate him as a person, which says a lot because I used to have a reasonably high opinion of him, but Miles Bridges is contributing. It's just a matter of keeping functionality. It's a matter of keeping healthy. But you've also got to look, a lot of these teams in the East are below 500 or at 500, and I wouldn't necessarily say that a lot of them have played some really tough competition, so you now need to gauge exactly where they're standing on the season. If they're sitting at 500 and haven't played anyone decent, they're a really tough team to gauge. They're a really tough team to try and judge, particularly when you know they have those defensive faults, when you know the injury bug goes through the team. It's going to be a lot of work for them to really try and produce something and really try and be consistent. I do like the fact that they're trying something here. They're trying to generate offense. They're not afraid to get up and down the floor, get shots up and play, carefree basketball. And I think that's ultimately what's going to help them, that they're just going to get up and down the floor. They're going to, freely play, make, stuff like that, and try and contend defensively where they can. But again, I just worry about the chemistry of this team, and I do just worry about the injury bug. At some stage, you've got to feel history may repeat itself, and I just have a feeling it's going to bite. I don't know how, I don't know when, I just have a sneaking suspicion. Over to Chicago, 1-3 record. They are just outside of that playoff race, but a big part of it's coming down to consistency right now for Chicago. They did get that one win against Atlanta, but we're starting to see now that, hey, some of these young guys that they've now paid, some of these guys that are trying to reinvest, some of the guys that, we've put in on the floor, maybe some of the honeymoon period's over. Maybe this is where teams are starting to work them out. I'm not quite sure, but it's certainly something they're going to have to address. Vucevic continues to be the most consistent player. Now, I wouldn't have said that he stood out as their number one guy, but he's just been the most consistent player. Win, loss, anything like that. He's the one that's always there. He's the constant on the box score. He's the constant on the board. He's the constant offensively. It's really tough to not have him in consideration. 19.3 points, 8.8 rebounds, 2.3 assists, 1 steal, 0.5 blocks on 2.3 turnovers. So you're going to have a presence there of a guy who's going to be a double-double. At one point was probably the best double-double guy in the league, but we're looking back close to a decade since that point. He has matured a lot as a basketballer, but again, he can't sit there and just be that number one guy. If he's going to be the number one guy, they're not going to have success. This is where your Levine needs to continue to step up. This is where Kobe White needs to step up. Patrick Williams certainly needs to step up. And it's where you need to start seeing more out of your Josh Giddys. That's when you're going to start seeing a lot more out of this Bulls team. Again, had a couple of weeks there to start the season. Hey, things look really good, but now things have gone up the proverbial creek. They need to try and find some oars to get this boat back in the right direction. How they do that, I don't know, but it's something they seriously need to consider and something they need to keep in the back of their mind. Otherwise, they're just going to unfold. And the last thing Chicago needs right now with what they're building to is to unfold, is to unravel and get stuck in that trade circle and those rumours, much like Atlanta have the last couple of seasons. Speaking of guys that just continue to step up and teams that just continue to step out, that would be the absolute Eastern Conference favourites right now. They went from contenders. I think right now they're sitting as favourites. 3 weeks into the season, they're absolutely undefeated. 4-0 record. No one has touched them yet. And Donovan Mitchell just continues to put on consistent performances. For me, in week 3, the best player in the Eastern Conference. Numbers not necessarily reflective of a high performance, but this is the leader of a team and a guy who's proven to be a scorer and a pivotal number 1 option for a number of years now. How appreciated it was in Utah, I don't know. It does speak about just how small of a market they are. But Donovan Mitchell this week, 24.8 points, 4.5 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 1.5 steals, 0.3 blocks on 1.8 turnovers. Cleveland just keep clicking. If it's not Donovan Mitchell's night, it's pretty simple. It's Darius Garland's night. If either of them aren't doing anything, then there's a guy called Evan Mobley who's having a really big season himself, on both sides of the ball. People are talking about, and this is the only thing that does annoy me, people are talking about the fact, Evan Mobley's taken the step. Evan Mobley's been doing this for a couple of years. Injuries have prevented a lot of things. We're talking about a guy who, not last year, the year prior, was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. All of a sudden, he had half a season last year, totally written off. You got to give guys 4 years in this league to really mature, to really develop, and to really see where they're going to be. Evan Mobley's a primary example of that, especially with what he's doing this season. Cleveland are fine. Cleveland are steady. Their best record to start a season ever, and they're getting close to that number 2 all-time. Of course, 24-0, the best to start a season from the 2015-16 Warriors. I don't think they'll get that far, but they are certainly pushing everyone in the East to the brink. Here's a team that just continues to step up and step out and is certainly better than they were last year. And they've still got a couple more years to develop before you really start looking at them as a playoff team, as a really rebranded side. But the Detroit Pistons, 1-2 record on the week. They're currently 10th in the conference, did get that nice win over Atlanta. Cade Cunningham very much on the edge of a weekly triple-double. 22.7 points, 9.7 rebounds, 10.7 assists, 0.3 steals, 0.7 blocks, high usage rate there, 4.3 turnovers. I think it's just indicative of exactly how they're developing, exactly how they're going. And on the other side of it, exactly what happens when you really start to instill some belief into your team, belief into your players, belief into your system, and they give you some reward back for that belief. Cade Cunningham given a really big rookie contract. Wouldn't have thought that a lot of these guys now deserve it, but it's the money that's in the league. So, yeah, if it's Cade, does it look like Cade Cunningham should have a $200 million deal realistically? No. I defy anyone to actually prove me wrong on that one there. But if they're going to repay the favour, this is exactly what you've got to do. So Jason Tatum, it's a Jaylen Brown sort of thing, right? We're going to give you the money. We're going to invest the money into you. Now go and do something for us. Obviously, Cunningham's coming from a long way back in comparison to those guys. Same principles apply. Of course, Azar Thompson sounds like he's going to be back very, very soon. Double-double guy, really good defender. That's only going to bolster their team. We'll see how far away he is. But Duran and Ivy starting to click as well. This team is a lot better than we certainly thought it was going to be. A lot of veteran presence coming into it, a lot of smart coaching and culture stuff. It just shows how big of an impact it can have with a squad like this. Speaking of impact, that's exactly what the Pacers are now starting to do, because they're starting to mix things up there in the Eastern Conference. 2-1 record on the week, 3rd overall in the conference. Wins against Orlando, who started rallying New York, who are certainly going to be thereabouts. I mean, Orlando, New York, and Indiana, teams that I think many people consider to be very close to one another, or were going to be close to one another this season, and that's exactly what's happening. Benedict Mathurin, my prediction for Sixth Man of the Year. I don't know whether he's going to get there, but he's certainly a player that can have that impact, and certainly a player that's trying to have an impact when he gets a starting role as well. 26.7 points, 8.3 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 1 steal, 0.3 blocks on 1.3 turnovers. The big thing for Indiana right now is everybody's getting a chance. Everybody's getting a turn. It's as simple as that, really. There's not much more to say other than the fact that everyone tries to have a go, get a go. And they sort of are a poor team, poor man's Boston in that sense, because, they are able to be a side that is able to share the load, whether it's defensively, whether it's offensively, whether it's the fact that you're going to see Tyrese Halliburton have a 35-10 game, whether it's going to be Pascal Siakam be able to put up, 25, 5, and 6, whether you're going to see someone like Mathurin come out and have a 30-piece, whether you're going to see someone like a Miles Turner have a 30-piece, with everything that goes on there. TJ McConnell pushing the game defensively as well. So Really big stuff there for Indiana. I'm glad they're starting to make a bit of a move. I wasn't sure how they were going to settle, but they've started to settle really, really nicely. And hopefully they're able to contend pretty consistently moving through November and certainly into December. Over to the Heat, 1-2 record, and they currently sit 7th in the East. Got a win over Minnesota, and Tyler Hero continues to have, well, the best season of his career, and certainly the best season he's had since he was pretty much a unanimous six-man of the year winner. 26 points, 5.3 rebounds, 6.7 assists on 4 turnovers. Yes, that's right. Tyler Hero is a 26, 5 and 7 guy. Now, this is why stats are deceiving, because at no point would I have thought, considering one of the last players to have 26, 5 and 7 for a season for Miami was LeBron James. At no point would I ever consider putting these numbers up against the fact that Miami Heat LeBron was a zenith representation of what LeBron James was as a player. It's really interesting. I mean, I still think the way this team's going to succeed and the leadership of this team has to come from a Jimmy and a Bam. If it's not going to come from there, then you need to blow it up. I don't mind Tyler Hero being your third option, but Tyler Hero shouldn't consistently be your number one option. Do I think he should have a good night? Do I think there should be a time where someone gets a rest and Tyler Hero can really go and do his thing? Of course I do. You'd be silly not to. That's what happens when you've got a guy to lead your second unit, when you've got a guy who you can rely upon for some pinch scoring. But he shouldn't be the guy that you go, right, I need 25 from you and I need it every night. You're not going to succeed at that stage. There's another team I'm going to talk about with the way they're playing very, very soon, and a guy who's playing well for them. I've got nothing against these guys playing well, but it's usually indicative and representative of exactly where your team is at right now. And nothing against the Heat. If Tyler Hero's their best player, then they're stuck in the mud and they're going nowhere. Speaking of stuck in the mud and going nowhere, that's definitely the Milwaukee Bucks. 14th in the conference, got a win over Utah, but that's really not a bragging point this year considering exactly where that team sits. Giannis still continuing to be their best player and still has nights where he looks like the best player on the planet. 32.7 points, 13.7 rebounds, 3 assists, 0.3 steals, 1.7 blocks on 2 turnovers. You've only got one win on the week against Utah. There's just so much right now with Milwaukee. It's hard to put a finger on it. Like, you know, I'm not against the idea that you keep Damian Lillard, you keep Giannis, you keep Brook Lopez, and you clear everyone out. I'm really not against that. On the other side of it, I could totally understand if Giannis went out. I'm sick of this. I don't know what the Dame experiment's going to do and how long that's going to last, but he's going to be a player that's going to need to get to a side that allows him to be a third option. He needs to go and do a Klay Thompson. He needs to get to a side where he can just let his shooting do the talking. He can get up and down the floor. He can try and move things where he needs to, but right now that's not going to work. I mean, you've put two ball-dominant guys next to one another, and it started to work all right last year. They just never got their chemistry right in the end. Couldn't solidify it, just couldn't get the job done. It's not looking great again this year. Now, they could very well turn things back. Chris Middleton can come back and really change the way this lineup's going to look, but yeah, right now it's still being panic stations there. I mean, if Giannis is at the point where he's having 33, 14 and 3, and you're consistently not winning games and consistently underperforming, then that's when you need to look at the rest of the cattle in the paddock and potentially get some barbecue steaks out of those. The New York Knicks, they continue to climb, they continue to crawl, they continue to scratch, they continue to battle. They're playing long minutes, they're playing big minutes, but they're trying to have an impact where they can. 1-2 record on the week. They are 6th in the conference. They did get a win against Milwaukee. And the guy who's probably stepped up right now and looks like the number one, but again, we see this every year and we have for the last 3 years with New York, where the big guy steps up, feels like he's the man, he either gets injured or he can't take it, and Jalen Brunson all of a sudden has to try and step up again. I wonder how soon, if that happens for New York, that will happen. Karl-Anthony Towns is having a really, really nice offensive year. 32 points, 12 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.3 steals, 1.3 blocks on 2.3 turnovers on the week. But the issue right now is the defense there of the Knicks. Now, perimeter-wise, they've got no issue. I don't think that's a real concern there. But they do certainly have an issue at the rim when at one stage here during the year, and again, there's been a couple of games in week 4 at the time of recording this video, but I do know essentially through 3 weeks that Karl-Anthony Towns had allowed 32 or 35 at the rim. This man's 7 foot. I know you're not a defender, but it doesn't mean you can't try. For me, this just continues to open up the argument about Rudy Gobert in a really positive way, really. Particularly when you look on the other side of things. Minnesota aren't going great. I understand that. I get it. Julius Randle is not the offensive player that Karl-Anthony Towns is. That's considerable here. But in the Eastern Conference right now, if you can't defend, you're not going to win anything. And unfortunately for New York, it's like they've undone the cat flap on the bottom of the door, and every stray feline on the planet is allowed to just walk in and get a feed. If they're not careful, the big cats will come through, and not in a good way. Over to a team now that's not certainly worried about the big cats anymore after their bit of a stumble block in week 2. Week 3, they've managed to settle 2-1 record for the Orlando Magic, and they've ended up 4th in the conference. Got wins over New Orleans and Washington, of course, not the most stable teams in the league, but Franz Wagner managing to step up, step out, and doing what many thought and debated that he probably should have done at some point last season. 26 points, 5.7 rebounds, 6.3 assists, 1 steal, limited turnovers. And this is exactly what Orlando needed. They needed someone that was going to step up. They needed someone that was going to step out. Who was going to be the number 1 option? It was the same issue last year. The difference was he was bargaining and fighting with Banchero as to who that was going to be. The question now, which has remained, is does he have that ability to step up and step out when it's needed? And the answer is yes. Not the most aesthetically appealing player, there's no doubt about it, but Wagner has an ability to get a bucket. He has ability to score, he has ability to rebound, an ability to pass the ball, and he fits really well into the defensive scheme there of Orlando. Now, they've clearly got other pieces around them, but none of them are going to consistently be able to step up and be that number 1 option. That's exactly what Wagner can be. If they're able to have pieces that are going to slide in and out, then you're going to see Orlando continue to develop. You're going to see them continue to contend. Again, a team that outside of their 5-20 start 2 seasons ago have been well above 500 and proven to be a playoff level team. It's a matter of they're going to be able to stay consistent. If Banchero comes back healthy and they're in a really solid spot there in contention, who knows? Second round, a genuine opportunity here, particularly if you're going to have someone like Wagner step up and step out when it's required. Jared McCain, he features on the slide. It's about the only positive, though, that I've been able to find for Philadelphia in week 3. A 1-2 record, 12th in the conference, got a win against Charlotte. McCain with a career game, and a guy who's really starting to step up and step out and really feature highly for some of the contenders for Rookie of the Year. 16.7 points, 1.7 rebounds, 2 assists per game, 0.7 steals on 1.3 turnovers. The shining light and the beacon of hope right now for Philadelphia, a team that has not much else going for it. You've got senior players who won't play back-to-backs. You've got guys demanding big money, big possessions, and they can't get jobs done. And there are a couple of guys, obviously, on this team that can play. A couple of guys that can really get it done. Maxey being one, McCain proving a point this year to say that he can do it as well. Andre Drummond's still trying to get his double-double where he can when he's on the floor. Not that he's a young guy by any stretch of the imagination anymore, but you get what I'm saying. It's, again, I just don't see what Philly are doing. I mean, this is an absolute disaster of a season right now. Now, obviously, it's not to the extent of when they were trying to get Embiid. It's not when they were drafting Nerlens Noel. It wasn't when they were trying to make the most of Ben Simmons. It wasn't when they were trying to do something with Jahlil Okafor. It's certainly not when they were trying to do anything with Michael Carter-Williams. Well, let's not get that constrained. Tyrese Maxey has a lot more upside of everyone besides Embiid and realistically what Simmons was able to produce. But as a squad right now, they're old, they're slow, they're not consistent, they can't defend. And it's nothing against Jared McCain, but this is an opportunity for him to step up and step out, and he's doing really, really well. It's just a shame that Philadelphia is in that current position that he feels the need and realistically has to do that. Toronto, well, pretty bad week for them. Didn't win a game. They're dead last in the conference. RJ Barrett, though, is starting to step up a little bit more. It's quite funny because RJ Barrett showed that he could do this in New York. He did it pretty consistently in New York, but all of a sudden it went from, hey, Julius Randle is all of a sudden an All-NBA player, to, wow, Julius Randle's not committed and the Knicks suck, to, wow, they've got Jalen Brunson and they're really committed and they're playing well, to, geez, they've got Jalen Brunson and they're making really deep playoff runs. And there's never, ever been a mention of the contributions that RJ Barrett was making to that Knicks team. Nice week again here in Toronto, 18 points, 5.3 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 1.3 steals and 0.3 blocks. But it's something that the league has a massive issue in, and that's clearly that people don't watch the league, that they don't pay attention. And yeah, is everyone expected to watch all 30 teams? No, that'd be ridiculous. But to sit there and make really blanket statements about guys that have clearly put in the time, that have clearly put in the effort, it just doesn't make you look very smart, particularly from people in the know. And there's quite a lot of people in the know, and there's quite a lot of people who watch all teams and have seen these players develop. So to sit there and go, geez, can you believe RJ Barrett stepped up and stepped out? Well, yeah. He was doing it in New York and got no credit. He had to go somewhere where he was going to get his credit, where he was going to get his flowers. plenty of examples of that going on. Gilgeous-Alexander, everyone jumped on the bandwagon last year. Anthony Edwards, same thing. Bankero this year. These are all guys that have been stepping out previously, but because it didn't suit the narrative, they didn't get the credit. RJ, now that Scotty's not there at the moment, playing really, really well, getting a really good look. But let's not act like this is an overnight sensation. This is something that's been brewing and been proven for a long time. It's just a matter of people actually paying attention to it. Over to Washington once again. Didn't win a game. 13th in the conference, but Bilal Coulibaly still having a reasonable impact. This time doing more defensively, but it does scream a lot that I've managed to find the best player on a team averaging 13.7 points. That's a rough week. That's a really bad week. We're talking about the last team available here in the Eastern Conference, but it's pretty reflective of exactly where this team sits and exactly where it's progressing. If Coulibaly's best week. Now, 1.3 steals, 2 blocks a game, that's pretty good. I like the fact he gets a little bit of the boards there as well. But 13.7 points, I mean, it's the ultimate thing here with Washington right now, is they go on a scale of, hey, we can't score points, hey, we can't generate anything offensively, and we can't defend, to the other side of it. Hey, we've been able to find someone that we can unlock a little bit, and he doesn't have any support. Jordan Poole, sporadic. Kuzma, not available. Alex Sarr becoming one of the biggest waste of draft capital in quite some time. It's just one of those things, and I know that it's hard to attract people to go to these markets where they're small markets or, they're not an appealing city to want to go to. I get it, but if you're going to be throwing the money about and you're going to produce a winning record, that's when you're going to start to get people there. That's something that Washington need to hurry up and consider, and they need to do it really, really quickly, because at the moment, nothing against Bilal Coulibaly, but if a guy averaging 14, 4 and 3 is your best player in a week and you don't win any games, the alarm bells aren't ringing, then you're either tone deaf or you've been caught in the fire and it swallowed you whole. It's as simple as that. Over to the Western Conference, and we'll start with the Dallas Mavericks, who certainly by no means are in a good state right now for a team that's just come off the NBA Finals. A 1-2 record on the week, 11th in the conference, a nice win over Chicago, and a guy who continues to get absolutely no credit for what he's doing for this side right now, because, the lack of a better term, the white hope, of course, is certainly the guy that they've strapped the rocket to. But Kyrie Irving, another massive week. I mean, I think he's been Dallas's best player this year. I've got no issues in saying that. This week, another prime example. I mean, here's a guy who, another 50+% shooting performance and continued to show out and why he's one of the more efficient point guards scoring-wise the league's ever seen. 29.7 points, 6 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 2.3 steals, 0.3 blocks on 1.3 turnovers. The issue for Dallas is one that they faced similarly last year, but they were able to come right at the right time. And it's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on with a couple of different teams, but they're probably going to be an example of it as well. Realistically, we didn't see the NBA finalist in the West really hit their straps until after the All-Star game. Is it something they're going to do this year again? I don't know. I just wonder whether they've lost a little bit of senior leadership that they haven't been able to replace. They've lost a little bit of depth that I don't think they realised they had. And defensively, they're not as switched on as they have been in previous years. Obviously, the efficiency on the offensive end has to lift. That's naturally going to make their game better on the scoreboard. But they've got to do a couple of few of the intangible things and try and adjust a few other things as well if they're really going to get back in the game. Speaking of getting back in the game, this has been absolutely ridiculous, to the point where we're talking about a guy who, let's get into it really, really quickly. Denver are 3-0. They started 0-2. They've jumped to 4th in the conference. They defeated Oklahoma City, one of the key playoff contenders. They've defeated Miami, a team that just proves to be a crux in everyone's side in the East, and they've beat Dallas, last year's finals representative from the West, albeit not a strong start this year. And then you go and look at what Nikola Jokic is pulling out of his backside night in, night out. On this week alone, 30 points, 16.3 rebounds, 15 assists per game. 2.3 steals, 0.7 blocks, high usage, high turnovers. We're talking about a guy who's also up there in deflections on the season. We're talking about a guy who's managed to absolutely rally this team from 0-2. At one point there, they were 7 and they were 0-2, and then they went 7-1. They're now 7-3 through 10 games. We're talking about a guy here who's potentially going to win his 4th MVP in 5 years. That's something only Bill Russell and LeBron James have done. He'd be the second center to ever do it. Like, guys with 4 regular season MVPs are Kareem, Russell, Jordan, Wilt, and LeBron. Like, we're talking about the Mount Rushmore level guys. And now for me, I've already got Jokic around in my top 15. This would well and truly put him in the 10, and there'd be a couple of really loved big men that would absolutely chuck a fit for it. But I would have no issues with sliding this man into number 10, and at worst, having him as the 9th greatest player of all time, depending on how this season unfolds. But we'll see how this pans out. Speaking of guys that have an impact, top 15 players all time, another big week for Steph Curry, and even bigger week for Golden State. And I know we're only early on in the season. 2-1 record, 3rd in the conference, but took down the biggest opponents in both conferences to get it done. Defeated Boston, the reigning champions, the best team in basketball, the most rounded team on the planet, and took down the Oklahoma City Thunder. Steph Curry's walked back into this team that was essentially undefeated. Monster week himself, 25 points, 4.3 rebounds, 6 assists. He's just consistently going along at 25, 5 and 6, has been for a number of years now. 2.3 steals, 0.7 blocks on 4 turnovers. Here's a guy that walks into the team, ball in hand, ball out of his hand. The absolute dynamic of the defense changes. The absolute dynamic of the offense changes. And yet here they are slaying the Dragons of both respective conferences. Like, this is when we talk about all-time levels of how great this guy is. When we talk about top 15 players all time, this is why, when you talk about all-time teams, this is why he's in this greatest point guard of all time discussion. Like, we're talking about a guy here who doesn't need the ball in hand to change the game. We're talking about a guy who can slide into any team no matter how they're playing because he doesn't need the ball in his hand. That's the level that Steph Curry plays to. That's how he's played for quite a number of years now. We're talking about over a decade of what this guy's done. Consistent, proven, time and time again. Really interesting start by Golden State. Massive week by them. Statement week by them. See how the rest of the league reacts. Nice week here from Houston as well. They're starting to really chip away, and this is a side that, again, has just believed in their young talent, hasn't traded anything away. They are in a couple of different rumours, and we'll get to them in a second. But a 3-1 record through 4 games on the week, 5th in the West. Wins over San Antonio, Washington, and Detroit. Now, of course, it does inflate your record a little bit. You can only beat what's in front of you there. But some of the young guys really stepping up, really taking advantage of that opportunity. Alperen Şengün continues to be the man. Baby Yoke, as they call him. I mean, a minute Yoke in comparison, especially with what we just talked about before. Şengün, 20.3 points, 10.3 rebounds, 3.8 assists, 0.5 steals and 1.5 blocks on 1.5 turnovers. A really, really nice week for him. The belief is there for Tari Eason. The belief is there for Jalen Green. Plenty of pieces around them that are really starting to try and find their fit. And ultimately, the conversation is, again, being steered around who are you trading, who's coming in and out of the team, and those particular pieces right now are open conversations allegedly with the Bucks and apparently willingly and open conversations with the Miami Heat, particularly for Jimmy Butler. Now, I've got no issues if you want to go and grab Giannis, one of the 25 best players of all time, needs a reboot there. Can clearly pay both ends of the floor, but what's it going to cost you? Is it worth blowing up the future of this team and building blocks with this team to go and get a guy who's got, 3, 4, 5 more years in him, but he's probably going to peter off after that? On the other side of things, I'm not going to get Jimmy. Big decisions there by Houston, but right now that week really proves why I think you should keep this core together. The Clippers had a really nice week themselves, and they're starting to try and find their feet, try and be competitive, and really looking like, glorified role player team at the moment. And that's even with James Harden on the floor. But Norman Powell having a really breakout season. And again, I'm going to come back to surprises and how people are playing, but also indicatives of how people are playing. I'll get to Norman Powell on that in a second. 3-1 record, 9th in the conference. Defeated Philadelphia, Sacramento, and Toronto. When you look at Norman Powell's numbers, really great stuff. 28 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.8 assists, or 1.5 steals, 0.3 blocks, 3 turnovers a game. He spoke about how important it was for his team and how important it was for himself to be able to step up, to really take advantage of things and, show that addition by subtraction when you lose Paul George. But I think the question really now has to be raised, exactly where, number one, was everyone who didn't understand that Norman Powell could play basketball and was a decent contributor for the last few years. Again, a guy that was doing this in Toronto, but of course didn't suit the narrative. Siakam, Van Fleet during that particular period hasn't necessarily suited the Clippers mold here with Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, Westbrook, everything that's going on here. So it's great. I'm glad he's finally getting the spotlight. I'm glad he's really showing out. Showing he can play and how important he is to this squad. But on the other side of it, is it indicative of where your team is right now that Norman Powell having a breakout season is the essential leadership core, number one scorer? That should be an indicative of where your squad is. Is Norman Powell a guy who's going to be consistently that guy? I don't know. It's not a shot about how he's playing. But I think you need to assess where your franchise is at. If Norman Powell's your 25-point per game guy, and you're really gaslighting that and blowing that up, that's awesome. But a bit of perspective. Look at where you are compared to the rest of the league if that is your number one option. Over the Lakers managed to snag a 2-1 record on the week. 7th in the conference overall, so they're still sitting thereabouts. Defeated Philadelphia and Toronto. LeBron with a massive, massive week. Again, the most statistically consistent player the league's pretty much ever seen. There's a lot that goes into that, but you can't deny that. He's statistically the most consistent player the league's ever seen. 26.3 points, 9.7 rebounds, 11.7 assists on the week, 0.7 steals and a block a game, 3.3 turnovers again. High usage, high turnovers. It comes with the territory there. The real question here for the Lakers, though, is how consistent can they be if you're going to just leave the ball in LeBron's hands for an extended period? Because the best the Lakers have looked this year, and I've harped on about it before, the best the Lakers have looked this year is when the ball's moving through sets of hands, when they're running possessions for other players, they're getting them involved and they're building their confidence. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely crucial that you've got LeBron James locked into your side. It's absolutely crucial that there are things that are going to go his way. There's no doubt about that. But to sit there and consistently go, well, X, Y, Z, look at this, it's unbelievable. Yeah, it is, but he's got the ball in his hands. A lot of players with the ball in their hands do a lot of unbelievable things. And we really need to consider that there. I think the other crucial part for the Lakers, they're going to need to get touches into Davis. His plantar fasciitis injury is going to be a concern for most of the year. We want to see him get to 65 games. I don't think anyone in the league doesn't. We've seen what Anthony Davis does when he's the healthiest player on the team. He's the best player on the team. It's a matter of getting him on the floor, getting him his touches, getting everyone involved, and specifically having him there defensively, because all these offensive numbers are fine. If Anthony Davis isn't there, your defense isn't locked in, you're not going anywhere. Speaking of defensively locked in, that's exactly what's going to help the Memphis Grizzlies, and something that's really putting them on a pedestal, and certainly giving this guy, Jaren Jackson Jr., another solid season. 3-0 record on the week, 6th in the conference, defeated the Lakers. Again, we know how they've been playing. That was a pretty comprehensive win. The Wizards, not playing great. Trailblazers, they're a little hit and miss at the moment. Jaren Jackson Jr. with a really nice week there. 26.3 points, 6.3 rebounds, 1.3 assists, or 1.3 steals, or 1.3 blocks. A lot of consistency there. 2.7 turnovers a game. They've got to now start to hit their stride, because defensively it's all about energy and effort. They've got capable wings, they've got capable players, they've got capable defenders. They now need to be able to transition that into a solid offensive game, and they can't just be doing that by relying on lobs to Jaren Jackson Jr., by athletic plays by Ja Morant, and hoping that someone like a Desmond Bain is going to be able to step up here and there and assist them out, because that's essentially how that team has been for the last couple of years when healthy. It's not something they're going to be able to rely upon, but they certainly have enough pieces around them to be able to do it. Your Brandon Clarks, your Marcus Smarts, they're veteran level guys right now, so you need them to be able to step up and just get them to deliver. This is a Memphis team that's 6th. They can do a little bit better. You've only got to look at the depth of the conference there. It's a tight foot race. But if they tweak a couple of things, it can really get flowing offensively. Then this defensive feed is just going to work wonders going into transition there. And ultimately right now, it's a matter of Memphis getting that offensive balance, getting that strategy on, because once they get out of their defensive sets, it can be on for young and old, and they can shock a few teams. There's no doubt about that. Minnesota, they had a conference finals run last year, and they're going to have to time themselves again this year if they're going to want to do it. And this guy on screen's taken another leap in his game. Of course, he started to raise his three-point shooting. Anthony Edwards on the season, 200 record on the week, 8th in the conference, defeated Chicago and Portland. So how do you judge them there? I don't really know, but a really nice week by Edwards. 30.7 points, 6.3 rebounds, 5.7 assists, 1 steal, 0.7 blocks on 4.7 turnovers. So again, it's back to that high rate there, but yeah, it's now a matter of putting up and shutting up. This is a side that can clearly lock in defensively. They're still a top 5 defensive team. When you're going to look at what Gilgeous-Alexander Walker, what Daniels brings to the team, what Mike Conley brings to the team, Ant's a willing defender. Obviously, you've got a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year in Rudy Gobert. So for now, it's a matter of getting out and finding that chemistry consistently on the offensive end. It's very similar to Memphis in that sense, because you've only got to look at exactly how Julius Randle's able to plug and play in this offense. He's had a really, really nice start to the season. I don't know whether he's going to be consistently that high-level scorer that a Karl Anthony Towns is, but he also doesn't need to be. If Anthony Edwards in the next couple of weeks simply gets to the end of November and goes, hey, look, dude, I know that you can give us 25 and 10, but I don't need that right now. If he's going to get 17 and 8 out of Randle consistently as a second option, and he's going to be able to step up on an offensive end, then, there's going to be nights where you're going to say, geez, Julius Randle's had 30 and 10, or geez, he's 25 and 12 again tonight. They don't need that out of him all the time, and I think once they can really establish that pecking order quickly, much like they did with Brunson in New York when Randle was there, they're going to be a far better team. Defensively, they're locked in. Offensively, much like Memphis, they've just got to get that chemistry correct. New Orleans just continue to get hit by the injury bug. They continue to hit no success. And the guy on screen he's pretty much been their latest injury concern right now. 0-3 record, 14th in the conference, no wins on the week. Jose Alvarado, really nice work. 17 points, 2.3 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 2.3 steals and 1.7 turnovers. It's crazy to think a guy who started with a gimmick of just picking the ball off in the backcourt by trying to hide, over near the team's bench or in the corner, has really formed into a really credible player. He is a good level defensive player, but right now he's injured. He's going to be out for another 2 weeks. So all of a sudden you're looking at Zion Williamson, you're looking at Dejounte Murray, you're looking at CJ McCollum, and you're looking at Jose Alvarado they're not there. There go your 4 primary ball handlers gone for at least, it's certainly for the next 2 weeks. Zion with hamstring injuries, Dejounte Murray's out with a broken hand. I seem to talk about this all the time when the subject of New Orleans comes up when they're not playing well. Injuries have honestly shot this team of what they potentially could have been. Brandon Ingram and Zion have shown individually what they can do. CJ McCollum has shown what he can do next to players. Dejounte Murray has shown what he can do when he's committed. Jose Alvarado, a proven little from a gimmick guy, again, as I mentioned, right through to being a genuine player, and they can't get on the floor at the same time. So when they do, they're still finding things out, and by the time they potentially have a chance to get chemistry, it's too late. I don't know what New Orleans are going to have to do. Maybe their conditioning department's the question, but yeah, just tough times once again for the Pelicans. We turn from arguably the worst team in the West to the absolute best team in the West right now. They are leading the conference 2-2 on their 3rd week. They are number 1, as I mentioned. Wins over the Rockets and the Clippers, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just continuing to step up. They've been hit with a huge injury bug there. Chet Holmgren, 8 to 10 weeks, and that's going to compromise the potential contract earnings that he can have. But 2-2 week, despite losing one of the Defensive Player of the Year candidates, one of the most improved candidates there, all because of a guy who, for me, probably should have been the MVP of the league last year. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 31.5 points, 3.8 rebounds, 5.8 assists, 1.8 steals, and 1.3 blocks. Just another typical night for Shai. 32, 4 and 6 with 2 steals and a block. Just another typical night. But despite the couple of games that were a little rough there, OKC just continued to bounce back. I mean, we're talking about the number 1 team in the Western Conference, and they're not afraid to keep pouring in points. They're not afraid to try and lock in defensively. Alex Caruso, he's gone over to try and stifle their defense a little bit more. I've seen these statistical comparisons there with Josh Giddey. Of course, offensively, Alex Caruso is not going to do what Josh Giddey does. On the other side of things, I know if I had to pick someone for a stop to save my life between Giddey and Alex Caruso, I am definitely not choosing Josh Giddey. It's as simple as that. OKC, they continue to run deep. Players just continue to step up. Williams, another example of that again this week. OKC are fine. They're not happy they don't have Chet, but they are certainly fine, and they are certainly on a tear. To the Phoenix Suns, this is a team that's really still trying to kick along. Kevin Durant is out with an injury for the next couple of weeks, but they only managed to drop the 1 game on the week. They did defeat Miami and Dallas. They're 2nd in the conference, and Devin Booker just continues to show why, realistically, he's one of the 2-3 greatest Suns of all time for me at this point. big statement to make, but I don't think it's hard to see when you've got a guy who was the best player on a team, went to the finals, regardless of what you think of Chris Paul. A guy who was their best player in a final series. A guy who's consistently been thereabouts for the team for the last decade. Continues to step up, continues to show out a really nice week, and a guy who's become awfully adaptable and awfully can be moulded to wherever he needs to be on this team. They've picked up Bradley Beal, they've picked up Kevin Durant, they've got the passing ability there of a Jusuf Nurkic, yet someone like Devin Booker can come and have a week like he did just gone. 19.3 points, 3.7 rebounds, 11 assists, 0.7 steals, less than 2 turnovers. Or, in 2 or 3 weeks' time, we might see him here and it's like, wow, he had 36 and 6 for the week. There's a lot of factors that come with Devin Booker. Pretty well maligned and understandably so for, those preseason clips where it's like, hey, we're not doubling. A couple other different things where, you get a 70-point game and a huge loss and you're posing and things like that. There was some deserved criticisms that came along, but if you see the guy on the court and he's consistently killing you from mid-range, he's consistently providing scoring, he's able to jump into second, third option, he's able to bail you out when you need it, he's an extremely valuable asset. And if you're going to have Devin Booker as potentially the second best player on a championship team, with an offense that can fire like this in Phoenix, they are very, very dangerous, and I would not be sleeping on them at all as contenders out in that conference. And speaking of highs and lows, we go from the bottom of the conference to the top of the conference to back to the bottom of the conference again, and it sort of speaks indicatively of exactly where a team may be sitting, as I mentioned there, depending on how their leaders are playing, their best players. Is it a matter of, hey, we don't have any stock, or is it just a matter of, hey, we're not any good? Right now it can be an absolute mixed bag for Portland. They didn't win a game all week, 13th in the conference. Jeremy Grant, their best player, and there's no doubt about it that Jeremy Grant at times has proven to be their best player, but when you're 17.7 points, not grabbing 2 boards, you're not doing much defensively, okay, you're not turning the ball over, but you're not doing much when you do have the ball. Again, a really tough gauge. Now, they've got guys that have come back, guys that are having an impact, guys at other squads who had major impacts. Robert Williams III, he's not far away. Someone like a DeAndre Ayton, was able to have an impact when he was there with Phoenix. But it's just consistency right now, and it's exactly what Portland don't have. It's exactly what they need, but it's exactly what they don't have. And I don't know exactly where they're going to be able to pick it out from. They've got a lot of pieces, as I've mentioned, that could really fit in on other teams, but they just don't have that appeal to be able to get somebody there. They don't necessarily always seem to have the coaching. They don't necessarily have the drive and the commitment. There's a real rebranding going on in Portland post Damian Lillard. It hasn't been going well. Draft picks haven't unfolded, but you just seem to have these pieces that you could drag something for or pass along. Ultimately, I think they're going to have to pass them along, and they've put them in a terrible situation as a franchise. But yeah, Portland right now, a genuine mixed bag of lollies, to say the absolute least. Speaking of number one pieces that just seem to be able to gel together, they're 10th in the conference, 2-2 record on the week. But the Sacramento Kings, there's just little pieces that just seem to be able to find a way. I spoke about it pre-season with some colleagues at work, but I felt DeMar DeRozan was going to be a nice must-watch piece, having fallen into the lap of the Kings there as a third option, essentially, and realistically, if he's a third option that's going to pour in, week to week, 24, 4, and 5. What a third option to have. 23.8 points, 3.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists. Defeated his old side, Toronto, and defeated Phoenix as well. 1.3 steals, 0.5 blocks on 1.8 turnovers. The mid-range king, here's a guy that's not afraid to get a bucket, but ultimately right now, he's becoming a real nice bailout player without any pressure, because it's something that he's done for quite a number of years. You looked at him in Toronto. He was trying to be the number one guy, but he hadn't really refined a lot of his game. Going to the Spurs really helped him there, gets alongside Aldridge, so he goes along a genuine second star, a bit more freedom to play his game. He goes to Chicago, where he really has the best years of his career from an MVP level standpoint as far as a candidate there, and where he was really respected among the league. Now he's coming to Sacramento. He's got all that knowledge behind him. He can let someone like De'Aaron Fox play and teach them. He knows how to read off a big. He's had a really good week. 10th in the conference. I don't think this is where they're going to stop. It's just a matter of them being able to harness that chemistry there on the offensive end. Again, similar to Minnesota and Memphis. Once they get that balance there, I think they're going to be okay. They're definitely going to be better than a 10th seed. Over to the Spurs now. 2-2 record. currently sitting 12th in the conference. They're starting to fire a little bit here. They're a young side. I still think they're a year away from a postseason berth, but there's plenty going on for them right now. Defeated Portland and Sacramento. Wemby continuing to be one of the leading candidates for Defensive Player of the Year. Ultimately, he's the guy that's going to stop Dyson Daniels at this stage from being the Defensive Player of the Year, and it just comes from the fact that he's such a sheer anomaly in body size and body type and the way he plays that at the moment would get him over the line. Because I don't think both sides are going to have really impressive records, but when you want to look at how they're playing as individuals, it's going to be very, very hard right now, particularly now that there's a lot of gloss and there's no common sense applied to how Rudy Gobert plays. It's going to be between him and Daniels right now, you would feel. He had a nice week, 21.3 points, 11 rebounds, 2 assists. But the fact that we've got a guy here at 7'5" who's going to potentially tap on 2 steals a game, 4 blocks a game for a season. He went very close this week. He did the week prior. I mean, that's a scary thought. I mean, he's a guy that just routinely, 5-5 or 5x5, 5 and 5 as far as steals and blocks. He's had 2 5x5 games. We know he can stretch the floor offensively. We know how much fear he causes defensively. I mean, here's a team that can go on a 3-on-2 break or a 3-on-1 break, and if they've got Wemby, they don't know what they're going to do. Like, that's a different level. I love Dyson Daniels. I think Dyson Daniels is the best active Australian basketball player on the planet right now. I think he's arguably the best perimeter defender in the league. But Dyson Daniels doesn't have that, we don't know what we're going to do against this guy. He's getting there from a perimeter standpoint, but Wemby's a completely different beast in general. And finally, rounding out the week, team with only 2 games played, but when you're the absolute worst team in the league and the absolute drizzles, then it's fair to say that you're not going to get much time, or shouldn't get much time. 1-1 record, 2 games, 15th in the conference, the worst team in the NBA this year, which is really making no sense for me because unless there's some sort of tank job going on, there's no reason that Utah shouldn't be performing. Nothing's really changed from their team last year, and they started making a run in the back end, and I thought they were going to potentially going to sneak a 500 record there. Colin Sexton, their best player, they've defeated San Antonio, and again, just indicative of where your team is performing right now. 18.5 points, 3 rebounds, 4.5 assists. If your number one player on any given week in a 500 week, despite it only being 2 games, is around at 19, 3 and 6, it's not good signs. It's not good signs at all. 1 steal, 3 turnovers a game, which is crazy to think that how much possession are you getting for 19, 3 and 6 that you still turn the ball over 3 times a game. Crazy. I don't get it. Lauri Markkanen sitting there, at this point starting to twiddle his thumbs, I think, in boredom with what this team's going to do. Yep, they've signed him to that max extension. They've signed a lot of players to good deals. They've got some talent there, but they're not moving anything. They're not doing anything as a team unless they absolutely are trying to get into that Cooper Flag sweepstakes. I have no clue what Utah is trying to achieve, particularly because they don't appear to be very active. Now, in saying that, Danny Ainge is the GM. The moves we're expecting to see certainly wouldn't be happening in front of our eyes. So we'll see how that pans out. But I think right now we certainly have a leading contender for the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. Anyway, guys, that's been me. That's 3 weeks into the 24-25 NBA season. We've got some movers and shakers performance-wise. We've got some movers and shakers teams-wise. And we've got too many people moving and shaking too aggressively, and they're now sitting on the sidelines. The injury bug has been the major story of this season so far, and it's going to be interesting to see how it continues to impact players. We've got some real standouts that are really coming through, someone like a Dyson Daniels who's showing some genuine most improved signs there, someone like a Wemby who just continues to flourish where he's going to be, and then you've got the consistency of the all-time greats. LeBron still statistically consistent, Steph still having impact whether he's on the floor or not, and Nikola Jokic going through a prime that very few people in the history of the game, let alone the history of sports, have gone through. Really interesting stuff so far. I'm keen to see how week 4 plays out. Anyway, guys, that's been me. Thanks for tuning in to my week 3 review of the 2024-25 NBA season. I'm out.